As the first foray into 3D, Final Fantasy VII made massive waves not only for the PlayStation, but also for JRPGs in the West. This game was so influential that this game spawned an entire series on its own known as the compilation of Final Fantasy VII. These influences even made its way into other video game series and even outside the video game sphere entirely in popular media. And of course, the future games in the Final Fantasy franchise definitely feel the ripples that Final Fantasy VII made all those years ago. Today, we'll be looking at almost all the Final Fantasy VII references in Final Fantasy XIV. As always, this video will have spoilers for both games discussed. I also want to take this time to say that this is where Final Fantasy music starts to get copyright claimed on YouTube, and so it would mean a lot if you could leave a like, subscribe, and even comment if you enjoyed the video. If I also missed any references, don't be afraid to comment. I plan on making a What I Missed video at the end of the series, and all the comments help tremendously. Final Fantasy VII was released for the PlayStation 1 in 1997. This game introduced us to a character named Cloud Strife. As stated before, this game alone spawned an entire series known as the compilation of Final Fantasy VII. In that compilation is a sequel movie known as Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, which was originally released in 2005. Cloud has his outfit from Advent Children in Final Fantasy XIV. This can be obtained by subscribing to the game for 60 days. Cloud's bike from the movie also appears in Final Fantasy XIV. This can be bought from the MOG station, and it includes the music from the original game during the escape from Shinra HQ. The official name is known as the SDS Fenrir. The abbreviation SDS comes from Cloud's business in Advent Children, the Strife Delivery Service. Cloud's hairstyle was also only available to those who won art contests in Final Fantasy XIV. And finally, the Dark Knight Idol stance resembles Cloud's victory pose from the original game. Not quite a reference, but rather a similarity in animation. The ability Riddle of Wind and the skill Phantom Rush seem to have a striking resemblance to Tifa's Limit Break and Star Shower ability from Final Fantasy VII Remake. I feel as though this might be likely, as these abilities in Endwalker could have had their animation borrowed from other games. We'll actually see more of this concept later on in the series. Four minions that appear in the game that are references to Final Fantasy VII are the wind-up versions of Cloud, Aerith, and Tifa, and there is the Cat She doll. The wind-up Cloud, Aerith, and Tifa can be bought in the MOG station, and the Cat She doll was obtained by pre-ordering A Realm Reborn. The tooltip for mousing over the Cat She doll states, "What may be a few to you was everything to those who died." This quote is when Kachi and Barrett reflect on the lives that were lost due to Avalanche's actions. The squat emote, which was obtained by doing 10 missions with your squadrons, is a reference to the squat minigame that is found in Final Fantasy VII. This squat motion can be seen multiple times throughout the compilation. In the character configuration under log window settings, when you set your filters for each tab of your text box, you can see some familiar names of Cloud and Tifa showing off some of the different chat channels. One of the messages even references one of Cloud's lines in the game, "Let's mosey." There are several gameplay influences that appear in Final Fantasy XIV originally appeared in Final Fantasy VII. The first is the Materia system. In Final Fantasy VII, Materia can be slotted into your weapon and armor for different effects such as enabling spells and various abilities. In Final Fantasy XIV, Materia can be slotted into your gear and weapons in order to gain more offensive stats. The second gameplay influence is the Limit Break system. In Final Fantasy VII, the limit break bar builds by taking damage, and when the bar is full, you're able to execute a powerful attack. In Final Fantasy XIV, the limit break bar fills up over time and can be increased dramatically through various means. The limit break bar in 14 has various stages, and when a bar is filled, you can execute a limit break depending on the amount of bars and the role executing it. Most of the names of the limit breaks in 14 come from 7. The limit break Braver comes from one of Cloud's limit breaks. The sword used in Braver and Blade Dance is also Cloud's weapon, the Buster Sword. The level 3 Monk limit break, Final Heaven, comes from Tifa's final limit break with the same name. The name for the level 3 Samurai limit break, Doom of the Living, comes from Yuffie's limit break. The Dragoon limit break, Dragon Song Dive, is very similar to Cid's limit break, Dragon Dive. The level 1 range limit break, Big Shot, and the Machinist level 3 limit break, Satellite Beam, comes from Barrett's limit breaks. The healer limit breaks of Healing Wind, Breath of the Earth, and Pulse of Life all come from Aerith's limit breaks of the same names. Pulse of Life also has Aerith's staff during the animation of the limit break. And finally, the Squadron limit break, Ungar Max, comes from Barrett's limit break, also of the same name. Although it's definitely not the first time this pair appeared, Biggs and Wedge make another appearance in Final Fantasy VII. However, a third character was introduced to the duo in 7. Her name is Jessie. In Final Fantasy XIV, we see the duo of Biggs and Wedge also teamed up with a character named Jessie. A lot of her likeness comes from the original Jessie from Final Fantasy VII. Now, let's move on to the Final Fantasy VII areas that appear in Final Fantasy XIV. The first of which is Costa del Sol, which is a coastal resort located in Lenosha. The name comes from Costa del Sol in Final Fantasy VII. The next is the Seventh Heaven, which is a bar and the base of operations for the Scions of the Seventh Dawn. This name comes from the Seventh Heaven in Final Fantasy VII, in which it was also a bar as well as the secret base of operations for Avalanche. There is also the Beehive found in Yulmore. This area is a reference to the Honeybee Inn. A subtle parallel found in Final Fantasy XIV is the city of Amarot, found in the expansion Shadowbringers. This city was home to the Ancients, a long-forgotten civilization that existed before the time of Final Fantasy XIV's world. This parallels the Forgotten City in Final Fantasy VII, where it was home to the Ancients, or the Cetra in Final Fantasy VII. Both areas are also found within a coral environment. And finally, the last area that appears in Final Fantasy XIV is the Gold Saucer. This is where many of the minigames, including Chocobo Racing, appears. This takes after the Gold Saucer from Final Fantasy VII, in which it also had a bunch of minigames and Chocobo Racing. The music is also rearranged from the original Gold Saucer music as well. The main scenario describes life after death as the person's aether going into the ethereal sea, otherwise known as the life stream. It is even said that teleportation in Final Fantasy XIV temporarily sends a person into the ethereal sea. This concept of the life stream goes all the way back to Final Fantasy VII, where it is known that all energy on Gaia comes from the life stream. The essence of the planet, the memories, emotions, and knowledge of all life is contained within the life stream, and when a person dies, their energy becomes one with the life stream. There is a quest in the fringes where Materia believes that his father was a coward and abandoned the village. It is revealed, however, when the village was attacked, his father died trying to protect the village and ultimately turned to stone due to the poison that the monsters inflicted upon him. This story is a direct reference to Red 13's story, in which he also believed his father was a coward, until Bugenhagen reveals to him that his father was actually trying to protect the Cosmo Canyon, and it is at the entrance to the canyon where his father will stay for eternity, protecting the citizens of the Cosmo Canyon. In Shadowbringers, there is a character by the name of Vothri. When he was still in his mother's womb, he was infused with the essence of the Light Wardens, giving him the ability to control Sin Eaters. Because of this ability, he believed himself to be the god of this world. This parallels Sephiroth's story, in which he was infused with Genova cells while he was still in the womb. The two characters shared identical traits, as both believed that they were the chosen ones to rule over the world due to their unique conditions. And now, let's get to the bosses. The first of which is the Magitech Scorpion that is found as the first boss in the Alamigo dungeon. This boss comes from the first boss of Final Fantasy VII, the Guard Scorpion. In both instances, the players are warned not to attack if the tail is up. The next boss is the Unknown, which is a reference to the unknown enemies found in the Galnica transport airship. Next, the Ultima weapon, which is found at the end of the original A Realm Reborn storyline, has a striking resemblance to the Ultima weapon found in Final Fantasy VII. Hades, who we fight at the end of the Shadowbringer storyline, uses a model that is based off the Hades model from Final Fantasy VII. His enrage attack is Black Cauldron, which is the ability that Hades uses once he can be used as a summon. And finally, although the name Sephiroth is very similar, it is not a reference to Sephiroth from Final Fantasy VII. The name actually comes from the emanations in Kabbalah. This is much more clear with one of Sephiroth's attacks, Ein Sof, which is another important concept of Kabbalah. However, because of the similarity in the names, the achievement when defeating Sephiroth's extreme trial says Veni, Veni, Venias, which is a lyric found in the famous piece One-Winged Angel. Archbishop Thordan VII is known as one of the leaders of the Holy See in Ishgard. His personal guard, known as the Heaven's Ward, are under Thordan's command, and it is at the final boss of the base storyline of Heaven's Ward we see all of them in action. At the climax of the fight, they unleash their final attack, the Ultimate End. This is an entire reference to the Knights of the Round summon found in Final Fantasy VII, in which that attack is also known as the Ultimate End. And both are completed with the breaking of the screen. There is also another reference to the Knights of the Round, in which Hildebrand becomes the victim of the Ultimate End during the Hildebrand storyline, also complete with the screen break. And finally, let's talk about the 7th Imperial Legion. One of the leaders of this legion, Nail Van Darnus, who is driven into insanity, brings down Dalamud to destroy the entire world. This parallels Sephiroth's descent into madness and his journey to bring Meteor down onto Gaia. Nail's successor, Valens Van Varo, takes after Professor Hojo, in which he used human experiments in order to complete his own research. He brought about the weapon projects. These weapons are modeled after the weapons that are found in Final Fantasy VII. We have the Ruby weapon, the Emerald weapon, the Sapphire weapon, and the Diamond weapon. And there we have it. It's pretty clear that the entire Final Fantasy series owes a lot to Final Fantasy VII. The game brought so many into the world of Final Fantasy. The game was such a smash hit that we even saw its influences outside of video gaming in general. And the series as a whole wouldn't be as big as it is now without Final Fantasy VII paving the way. Anyway, thank you for watching, and as always, if you liked the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. It will always be appreciated. And next, we'll look at the world of Final Fantasy VIII.